Hey guys, just wanted to make a quick video, or maybe not so quick video, reviewing some pickleball paddles here. In particular, I wanted to spend some time talking about this Juciao or Juciao. I think I'll just pronounce it Juciao if I can remember, as I have no clue how to pronounce this company's name. I've been seeing this company get talked about quite a bit online, but there's really no reviews on them besides just saying, hey, it's pretty good for the value of the money. Other things to point out is I have spent some time trying a bunch of different paddles, so I'll try to compare them to that, and that's what this list is kind of the paddles I've tried, and then kind of telling you what I liked and didn't like about them. And then just a little bit for me, I come from a very heavy tennis background. My skill level in pickleball is probably somewhere like a strong 4.0 to mid-tier 4.5. I don't play tournaments. I don't play in things where there's a lot of sanctioned rankings, so I don't really know. But I'm just basing that ranking on other players that I've played against and kind of how I fare up with them. So I know that's a pretty big range, but they'll give you an idea that, like I said, I'm probably like in the 4.5-ish, weak 4.5, high 4.0 kind of category for the most part. So really quickly, just like many other people, I started using a fiberglass paddle, which was the Onyx Evolve, for a very long time. And after playing with that, and I thought it was perfectly fine, I didn't have any issues with it, I started seeing people with the raw carbon fiber paddles, and they were telling me how much more spin that they got and all these other things. And so coming from a tennis background, that was my biggest complaint with pickleball, was I was like, hey, I can't put spin on the ball, I can't control the ball quite as well, and all these other things. So I wanted to look into a raw carbon fiber paddle. Considering that I don't really play that much, or I wasn't playing that much, I didn't want to invest like $150 or $200 into a raw carbon fiber paddle. And so at that point, I started looking into my options. And I did try a Carbon 1 very early on, and I was amazed by how much spin and control I had from the paddle. So then I knew, I was like, hey, I want something similar. So then I went on AliExpress and I found this, and this is back in like May of 2023. And at the time, these were only $35. So I thought, hey, if this looks dimension-wise, looked exactly like a Carbon 1, I was like, for $35, I'll take the risk and buy it and see what happens, and decide from there. It took about 2 weeks to get to me, and I started playing with it. I thought it was pretty good for the most part. The grip is actually pretty large. It almost feels like a 4 3/8, if not a 4 1/2 in terms of tennis wise, but I didn't have any issues there. It definitely provided more spin than all of the fiberglass paddles that I have tried in the past, and the ones I've tried in the past was the Onyx Z5, the Babolat Rebel, and then Engage Encore MX, which is the fiberglass model of that. And so I was happy in that regard. I thought, hey, I'm getting more spin. I can kind of curl the ball or control the ball easier. However, I felt like it was kind of light, it was kind of unstable, and then I just didn't like the power levels associated with it. And so I put on some lead tape, and so the strip goes from here all the way to the, I guess, like 1 o'clock position, and same thing on the other side. And then I even ended up adding a little bit more over time, because I just wanted more stability and then a little bit more power. And with that amount of lead tape, I think the paddle originally was about 8 ounces. It's right around like 8.3 at this point. And so at that point, I felt the sweet spot was amazing. Like, I felt like if I didn't hit directly in the middle of the paddle, it still felt very solid and didn't have any issues. I still would argue that I wanted just a little bit more put away power. Again, it wasn't horrible. If I was playing weaker players, I thought it did perfectly fine. But some of the faster hand battles, or the guys with faster reaction times at the net, I just wanted just a little bit more put away power. And so it kind of put me in the boat of like, hey, let's look for some other options. The other thing I'd like to point out, and maybe it was just my paddle in particular, after like 2 hours of play, the edge guard kind of separated slightly on the Juciao. I ended up just super gluing them back together, and I haven't had any issues yet. But I felt like 2 hours of hitting for that to separate was kind of bad. But again, maybe it was just my situation, my case, and not representative of all the paddles by Juciao as a whole. Just wanted to point that out. So basically, to summarize this paddle, great spin for the most part, very, very low powered, And then basically the sweet spot was kind of small until I put on the lead tape. So in the seeking of creating more power, at this point, like I said, this is May of 2023. Thermoform paddles were kind of like the big hype. And so I started looking into the thermoform paddles. And these are kind of off-branded companies because, again, I didn't want to pay $200 plus for a thermoform. So I tried the Asterisk VK1000, the Neonic Force 16 millimeter, the Vatic V7, and then the Yola Perseus 16 millimeter. And so I would argue the first three all had tremendous power compared to the Juciao. It was very, very noticeable, like incredibly noticeable. Like I could swing the same shot and it would just rocket off the paddle. One kind of thing to caveat to point out is that I personally, and this comes from my tennis background, is I like a very plush, soft feeling. I like to feel the ball sit on my paddle for a really, really long time, like dwell time is what I call it. I like it to just really dwell on the paddle, and it helps me control, and it feels like I can manipulate the ball with spin or whatever it is more so. And so automatically what happened with all the thermoforms that I've tried is they just feel like the dwell time is incredibly, incredibly short. Like literally it hits the paddle and then it bounces off super, super fast. It almost feels to me like I'm playing with a wooden board, right? Like literally the ball hits and then it comes off incredibly fast. And so this was super frustrating because then I felt like I couldn't control my shots. I felt like the dinks and the resets and all these other things, I was having a lot of trouble with it. Even drives, I felt like besides straight out put away power, I couldn't like feel what I was doing with the ball. Granted, like I said, the spin was great, the power was great, but I would hit with these for a couple games and then automatically be like, hey, I just don't like how inconsistent I am. And I know a lot of people are like, well, you need to spend like a month for it to break in and all these other things. Sure, that could have been a reason. But for me, I knew pretty quickly, I was like, this is just too much. I will say the Yola Perseus 16 millimeter, I thought was pretty fantastic. I thought it was a perfect blend of power and spin and feel. But the caveat is I was not willing to pay whatever MSRP is, $250 or $200 for a paddle. So I kind of crossed that off the list. And so at that point, I kind of went back to this Juciao, was using it for a while. Again, didn't really have any issues with it, but still deep down, I was like, hey, I wish I had a little bit more power type of vibe. And so I started, asking around or just borrowing other people's paddles and trying them out. And so then I went on the tier of basically the XSpak, which was supposed to be an imitation of the Carbon 1, which I really liked, the Ronbus 1.16, 3.16, the Vatic V7 Prism, the Vatic Flash Prism, and then the Yola Hyperion. So automatically with the Flash and the 1.16, I don't like the curved shapes of these. I forgot what they're called, but these are elongated paddles. And I just feel like in all the curved ones that I've tried, I feel like I hit very high up on the paddle. I feel like it's just really unstable up there. And so automatically we'll just say cross out for now, 1.16, and then the Flash Prism I didn't like. In particular, the Flash Prism I felt was like too light, too whippy, like the swing weight was too low. And so I just crossed those out. The Hyperion here, I felt was too head heavy. I know that was a huge complaint for a lot of people. This also had the curved top, so again, cross that one out. So now I'm really down to the XSpak, the Carbon 1, and then the V7 Prism. The Carbon 1, like I said, I really liked. I just didn't want to pay $150 or $180 for a brand new one, so we'll cross that one out. So then we're down to the XSpak and then the Vatic V7 Prism. And so the XSpak is what I'm currently using. I actually really, really like this paddle. When I got it, I basically was hitting the Juciao and the XSpak back to back, or the leaded up version of my Juciao. And they both felt very, very similar, except you could kind of tell for me, the XSpak just felt more uniform, meaning that anywhere I hit on the paddle, it felt solid as one entity. With the Juciao, sometimes when I hit on outside of the sweet spot, you can, again, just really feel it flutter. Like it's just one of those things where there's a disconnect to how the paddle feels. And so the XSpak felt great. It was a little bit light for my liking. It came in like 7.8 ounces. So then I put in strips of lead tape again, from all the way from the handle all the way to the top on both sides. And then I put some in the handle as well. So now my XSpak is about 8.2 ounces. The Juciao is 8.3. And at this point, to me, this basically did everything this Juciao did, but better. Just a little bit more power, a little bit more solid in terms of sweet spot, and then it actually provides more spin than the Juciao as well. I felt like it's very noticeable when I drive or when I try to do a dipping drive, where with the Juciao, I can't consistently get the spin down right, and so sometimes I can get the shot in. Other times I spray a lot of balls and I don't feel like I've done anything different. With the XSpak, I very rarely, again, miss a ball that I don't know why I missed it. Meaning that, again, if I hit it long, I can totally feel that I hit through the ball too much or didn't put enough spin. And so the extra spin, quote unquote, on this paddle is quite a bit noticeable in my opinion from the Juciao. But keep in mind that from the Juciao to the fiberglass, it was a very huge noticeable step as well. Okay, so then we bring into the last two competitors. I basically have the Ronbus 3.16 and then the Vatic V7 Prism. The Ronbus 3.16 I actually felt was very similar to this Juciao. It almost, where originally when I bought this, I thought this was supposed to be a copy of the Carbon 1, kind of like how the XSpak is the copy of the Carbon 1. But I wouldn't be surprised if the Juciao or the Ronbus 3.16 were kind of mirrors of each other. And again, being the nerdy person that I am, just out of curiosity on the spins, I got one of those microscope attachments, and I have pictures of all the carbon fiber surfaces. And when you look at the XSpak and the Juciao, their surfaces are quite different under the microscope. But the Juciao and the Ronbus 3.16, very similar. The XSpak and the V7 Prism, very similar in terms of structure. And I can try to edit that in so you guys can see which one's which. But you can see how the carbon fiber, I don't want to say is layered, but kind of the grid that has been left. These two are not similar at all, while these two are very similar. I would argue the Juciao and the Ronbus is very similar. And then I have I looked at the asterisk and the neonic as well, and those are very different as well in terms of the texture that's associated with it. So really quickly, pointing out why I didn't like the Ronbus 3.16. Again, it felt too similar to the Juciao, not enough power. I felt the sweet spot was actually surprisingly small. And again, I just felt like the XSpak was more solid all around, and it was giving me what I wanted. So I don't want to say threw away the Ronbus, but we'll cross out the Ronbus 3.16. So then finally we went to the Vatic V7 Prism. This one is pretty similar to the XSpak in terms of the sweet spot being very solid. Feel is actually pretty good. Power is actually great. I think these two to me are almost on the same level. And again, my XSpak is leaded up, so I'm comparing it to the leaded up version. I would say the power level is almost the same, maybe a tad bit higher on the V7. I have also added lead tape to this as well. I thought it was a little bit unstable in terms of the sweet spot. So once with the lead tape, it was a little bit better. My biggest complaint with the V7 is still, again, that feel. There's not enough dwell time for me. It's better than the thermal feelings, but to me, it still is too fast, or the dwell time is too small for me to comfortably use it. If, let's say, XSpak stops making paddles, I could totally see myself switching to the V7 Prism, because I think that's my favorite one out of all the ones that I've tried so far besides the XSpak. So again, I'm not saying this is bad. I would say spin is very similar to the XSpak. Again, it's almost very close, except a little bit more or a little bit less dwell time. So the ball comes off the paddle quite a bit faster. But again, I would assume after a couple games, I could probably figure it out. So that's kind of like why I have these three. All the other ones I either gave away, sold, or did whatever I did with them. So I'm down to these three. I'm using the XSpak most of the time. I hardly ever use the Juciao anymore. And then sometimes I'll use the V7 just for fun type of vibe, just to goof around. And so to summarize, because like I said, I know a lot of individuals are here just for the Juciao comparison or review. To me, it's a great paddle for $35, right? It's one of those where it'll get you introduced to the carbon fiber realm. And if you aren't really invested in the sport and you don't need, again, high end, or you don't play tournaments because it's not technically approved, I think this will do great for 99.9% of the population. People who are super particular like me, like I said, I felt like the XSpak was 100% more noticeable in terms of what I wanted out of it. And that's why I switched. And like I said, I argue, like nowadays you can get these on Amazon for, I think it's like $80 brand new. And then there's a bunch of resellers who are selling like barely used XSpaks for like 40, 50 bucks. And so at that point, it's kind of like, hey, these are almost basically the same price. To me, I would 100% get the XSpak over the Juciao. But again, if you don't want to look into that, if you don't want to buy used, I feel like for $35, like I said, a lot of people may or may not even notice the differences. For me, I just feel like I'm very particular on what I want and what I like. So yeah, like I said, I will probably try to post up or link into this video too, kind of the microscopic pictures of the paddles, and you'll see what I'm talking about when I say these two are very different surfaces. But this one's actually similar to the Ronbus. And in the pictures, you'll notice that there's two of them for each paddle, because basically when you look at it straight on, it looks a certain way or texture. And then when you look at it like a 45-degree angle, it will look like a different texture. So I have included both the angles, and you guys can see what I'm talking about. So moral of the story, again, for $35, you can't really ask for more. I would argue most people would use this and think it's perfectly fine and have no problems. Totally worth it in my opinion.